Oh, hi there. I guess you could call this a public service announcement, but I just wanted to let you guys know at the top of the show that as of this episode, The System is Down will no longer be edited for profanity. Just putting that out there. When I first started the show, I wanted to take out all the profanity because I wanted this show to be something that you could listen to around your kids. They could, educate themselves on some new crazy outlandish theories and ideas in life. But I mean, let's be honest, the show is not really a kid-friendly show with or without the profanity, and if you're fine with them listening to the rest of the content, you're probably fine with them hearing a couple naughty words. Doesn't mean we're going to get any more explicit in how we talk, but it is the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast. It seems a little bit silly to talk about the things that are uncomfortable and leave out some of the uncomfortable words. So if your children are in the room and you don't like them hearing that kind of language, go ahead and put the earmuffs on or send them off to bed. But just letting you guys know so there's no surprises. Let's go. Hey guys, you can now support this show and make your life 50% better by going to patreon.com/The System Is Down and signing up for the Downers Club, where you're going to get access to a plethora of wild, crazy, and often offensive bonus audio and video episodes of the show on a weekly basis. For more information, just go to patreon.com/The System Is Down. The following is a Goulash Media production. goulashmedia.net.
Welcome to The System Is Down.
What's up, Downers? Welcome back to the least comfortable show on the web, The System Is Down, where we talk about all the uncomfortable topics like conspiracies, politics, and religion, the things that people just don't like talking about. We do that. So if you're new here, go find the person who invited you, give him a big slap on the rear and a kiss on the mouth from me and you, because I appreciate you being here and you're going to appreciate being here. And if you're one of the many people who tune in every single Monday morning for your weekly dose of discomfort, welcome back to the show. It's going to be a good one. Now, I had somebody tell me recently, earlier today actually, they just asked, why do you talk so long in the intros and outros of these episodes? Why do you do that? I listen to a lot of podcasts where they just play the music and jump into the conversation. Well, I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but in these interviews, the interview type of episodes especially, I feel like there's a little bit of setup that is kind of required, because there might be some explanation. There might be some things that don't really make sense because we didn't dig as deeply in the conversation. I just feel like there's some introduction and outroduction that is necessary. If I'm wrong, let me know. But I could take this one of two ways, this criticism. I could take it spitefully and spitefully make this intro extremely painfully long. Or I could make it spitefully, really painfully short, and we could just jump into it right now. Yeah, those are the only two options because I only deal in spite. I'm not sure if that's a healthy way to live my life, but that's where we're at. I'm going to stick with the short one, and it's not going to be as short as you want. Otherwise, we'd already be into the conversation now. But I'm going to set this up for you as quickly as I can. So here we go. If you've been watching the show or listening to the show for any length of time, you've probably seen our TriPartisan Triggering episodes where I have John Schweppe, Mark Claire, and Ryan Beckenbaugh on as a Republican, a Libertarian, and a Democrat to discuss different topics in the world and get three different sides. Do so in a very not shouty, very civil manner. It's pretty uncommon. Okay, I'm talking too long already. So we had this one set up and Ryan couldn't make it, and Bobby Volm is a guy who's in the forum and he's a Marxist. He's made that very apparent in the forum, which is great. He agreed within the last 20 minutes to jump on the show and take Ryan's place. So that's what we're doing here. We're talking about Marxism. We're talking about why he is a Marxist. So that's the conversation. And got to remind you guys about the Anti-News Tonight, antinewslive.com. That's where we cover everything that's going on in the world. It's basically our second show that Craig and I do where we talk about the current topics in the world in our dark comedic way. Go to antinewslive.com. It's a live show, live broadcast. You can call in, you can write in, you can whatever. Be a part of the show. antinewslive.com tonight at 9 o'clock Central Standard Time. Check it out. Also, got to give a shout out to our sponsors, the 29 Toes podcast, which is a different podcast from this. It's much less structured. It's much more free form, free flow. I guess ours is kind of, but theirs is just three guys drinking beers, talking about guy stuff like movies, music, video games, and whatever is happening in their life. So go check out the 29 Toes podcast for a chill, just laid back set of conversations. 29 Toast Podcast, wherever podcasts are sold. Check them out. Now let's get into this as quickly as possible. The latest episode of TriPartisan Triggering with our new member, Bobby Volm. Marxism. Let's get weird. Well, we're back with another episode of TriPartisan Triggering. We've been planning this for like 3 months. We've scheduled it multiple times, and they've all fallen through for one reason or another. And then we finally had a date set up like 2 weeks in advance because Mark here always complains that it's too short notice, as the complainer that he is. But we finally had this one set up 2 weeks in advance, and then lo and behold, our Democrat Ryan, he's a lawyer. He had something come up. Nothing on him, but it is a shame that we have to do it without him. But I wasn't going to let this one slip through the cracks because it's been so ongoing for so long. But we had a pinch hitter here, Bobby Volm, who has. Am I pronouncing your name right, Bobby?
Yeah, that's completely right.
Cool. Yeah, he was willing to step in. We've talked about it a little bit in the forum, and he worked really well for the 20-minute prep that I gave. Well, not really prep, 20-minute advance notice that I gave him, and came on graciously. So, Bobby, thanks for being here. Why don't you introduce yourself, give us your backstory briefly, and what brought you to the place that you are? Where you stand in politics?
All right, yeah. Thanks, Dan, for having me on the show. I was in the Facebook group, and I jokingly a couple times asked you to put me on, and here we are. Like I said, my name's Bobby. I've kind of shifted worlds in the political scheme. I've been, as far as right as an anarcho-capitalist to as far left as like a Marxist-Leninist. At this point, I find myself, somewhere quite a bit left of the Democratic Party, but I think quite a bit far south on the authoritative side as well. So a lot of people like that over the years, and just kind of found myself where I'm at now. So,
gotcha. Yeah, and we're having a little bit of a connection issue, so if that persists, we might have to go another route. But for now, we will stick with it. But it sounds like you're, well, Ryan is a Democrat by title, but he said the same thing as you did. I'm a Democrat, but I don't. I'm not a hardcore crazy Democrat.
Ryan is Alan Colmes. I hate to say it. I love Alan.
Alan Colmes? I'm not familiar.
Oh, really?
I always liked Alan Colmes too. I grew up watching.
Yeah, I love Alan Colmes.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Even though I was raised in a Republican household, when I used to watch Hannity and Combs because I was a nerd in high school, Combs is the one I liked, even though I theoretically just like he seemed like a cooler guy,
No.
These mystery voices that you're hearing will come as no surprise because they were able to make it tonight. It's Mark Clare from the Lions of Liberty podcast. He's our Libertarian representative. Mark, how's it going?
Good. Great.
Cool. When I ask you a question, you have nothing to say. When I don't, you do.
That's how I roll. I have no answers to actual questions, but plenty of bullshit to dish your way.
That's right. And of course, our Republican nomination, John Schweppe. How's it going?
Dude, it's going great. Like, I feel like we're making America great again.
Okay.
Things are great.
All right.
All right. Cut his mic.
Pump the brakes a little bit there, John. So, yeah, this is kind of super last minute, and I had certain things planned that would have worked probably. I don't know. I had things going a different way in my mind with Ryan. I know where these conversations would have gone. Bobby, you're a total curveball, but I'm totally open to it.
Are you calling us predictable, Dan?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, Bobby, before we get into any topics or anything, I'm curious you basically came into the forum saying, I'm a Marxist. If anybody wants to debate, let me know, which is cool. Yeah. So what brought you to the show? What brought you to the forum? Because I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure the only Marxist that's in the group.
Yeah, so Casey Gallenberger, I hope he's okay with me using his name.
Sure.
If he's witness protection, I'm sorry, dude. But I went to high school with him. He's a friend of a friend. And we kind of conflicted a little bit when we added each other on Facebook initially. He's, if you know him, he's fairly religious, and he's pretty intellectual. He's a really intelligent dude, and I really respected that about him. He doesn't make a lot of logical fallacies. He sticks to scripture, and he's really consistent. And the vast majority of things he says. So, I mean, we kind of went back and forth. I'm not a religious person myself. And he randomly just added me to your group. And I was just like, all right, cool. Like, everybody here probably disagrees with me. So I'm just going to put myself out there. I like civil discourse and I kind of like shit posting. So it seemed like kind of a good fit. And I don't think I'm super active in there, but, you know,
Sure.
I throw a couple comments in there from time to time. So.
Sure, and I appreciate it. I definitely appreciate you sticking around because, you disagree with a lot of people, and I think that's great. I don't want to make it into an echo chamber or anything, so whenever somebody does disagree, I'm all for it, which is why we do this. But, I'm glad you stuck around because we've had multiple people who are like, I like you, but this thing, it's not for me. Like good friends of mine who have just been like, no, I can't handle this anymore. So kudos. So as far as we could start out with the Marxist dealio and like your stance on that, and just change my mind.
Well, okay, change your mind. That's a hell of an accomplishment to do. I mean,
you're right. Change all of our minds.
all of your mind, not just Dan, but Mark and who I forgot the other guy, the high guy, Jim.
So Sweat.
Yeah, basically, what brought me into the Marxist sphere was really just out of curiosity. I bought a couple books. I bought Capital 1 and 2 by him, which are obnoxiously dense reads. Like I wouldn't recommend it honestly, but they are like fairly convincing of the evils of a lot of capitalism and a lot of the downfalls, kind of behind the scenes that we don't see, especially in the first world. And I kind of expanded out of there, reading a bit of Lenin, a bit of Mao, of which I'm not super big fans of either, but they did have some good writing. I found it very convincing. Basically, if I'm in this to change your mind, effectively, a capitalist is an individual who. You guys still there? Sorry.
Yep.
Yes.
So a capitalist is an individual who, under the state's protection, owns property. So the state agrees to protect that property. So that property is then outsourced through what we call employees. So the capitalist pays them a wage, which the state sometimes enforces, other times doesn't. Obviously, in the U.S., we do have an enforced wage. But he takes all of what they produce, he or she, capitalist can be male, female, or anything in between, whatever you prefer, takes all of what's produced except the wage for themselves. And a lot of that's reinvested, and it goes to overhead, and it goes to insurance, and it goes to a million other things. But legally speaking, the state allows the capitalist to get away with whatever he or she wants, so long as they kind of forfeiture the, whatever $10 an hour that they allot. And in a lot of countries, like, China's looked at as a communist regime, but I don't think anybody can deny they practice some form of capitalism. You look at people there, and they have no real minimum wage, and they're getting just pillaged out of their labor. So from a Marxist perspective, profit is unpaid labor. And I found that really compelling. And the way I see a lot of things, and I'm not talking small mom and pops, like small mom and pop shops, they do the same thing, but to a lesser extent. But if we look at a company like Apple, who just got listed as $1 trillion company, paying the vast majority of their employees literally poverty wages, not what we call in the U.S. poverty wages, but quite literally poverty wages on the global scale, driving them to things like suicide. These individuals are effectively getting away with murder. And I think they should be held accountable. I'm not one of these people that say go kill the rich, but I'm saying, there should be more employee ownership on it. And socialism really is the workers owning the means of what they produce in a Marxist sense. So I don't know if that's convincing to any of you or if you find it interesting, but nobody interrupt me. So that was cool.
That's what we do here. Mark and John, feel free to chime in at any point.
Only because my mouth was full. No, I'm just kidding.
Mark, your thoughts?
Okay, well, I've heard a lot of these arguments before, and at the end of the day, I don't think any of us are think that any of us are going to leave the show with a completely different worldview or anything like that.
Right,
But
right. Yeah. The change my mind thing was basically a joke. This is just discussion.
Of course. To me, it's more about, I think I can see the point of view of people and understand it better without necessarily having it change my mind. And I think that's kind of the idea behind these shows, is we all share our points of view. We'll try to talk about it, and I think it's more about, to me anyway, that's how it is with my show. I want to have the people listening start thinking differently about what we're saying, not necessarily think a certain way. Obviously, it's better if everyone thinks my way at the end of the day, but that's not necessarily how things work ever. Of all the points
Worked
you made,
on me.
I guess the only thing that I haven't really heard put that way before that I was hoping maybe you could expand on is just the one phrase you said: profit is unpaid labor under like a capitalist society is what. And I just want to start off by saying, like, I don't like the term capitalism, largely because of partly what Bobby was kind of talking about. I think in many ways what we have come to call capitalism now is generally the state protecting larger businesses, and larger businesses often benefit from those protections. I think it's more than simple property protections. It's regulatory protections. There are many laws created and many loopholes created specifically to protect the larger corporations. So it's not an incorrect, in some ways, it's not an incorrect analysis of the current situation. If you want to call this capitalism, it's not how I would describe capitalism, but because of the way our society is, it's certainly not a term I would use or a way I would describe myself, because to me it's just too darn dirty of a term. But I wanted to go back to just the one thing that I just didn't really fully understand, kind of the impetus of the phrase when you said profit is basically unpaid labor. Can you kind of expand on that?
Yeah, definitely. So, like I said, a capitalist owns a piece of paper that the state ratifies as legitimate. So I think even in, like, let's say a super minarchist society, like a Ron Paul, but even more bare bones government, let's say, there's always going to be the state recognizing property rights. And that's really, at least from a Marxist perspective, that's the state's fundamental duty. And you look at examples throughout history in the first states, and as states progress, property rights are really the defining nature of what a state is. And that is their most fundamental level. So the capitalist holds this piece of paper that the state ratifies and says, this is yours, do what you will with it. The capitalist starts a business, whatever it may be, and needs employees, can't do it all on his or her own. So they, contract some employees. They say, well, we'll pay you, $7 an hour. The state comes in and say, no, you pay them $8, what have you. So the capitalist, if what the workers produce is valued at more than $8 an hour or $7 an hour, wherever you want to draw the line, the argument kind of fits the shoe. If they produce anything above what they are paid, the capitalist is taking that away from them, because the workers who really produces the product. So if you produce something and somebody takes however much away from you, that is taking away from your labor. So what you produce is what puts value into the market. Now, there are other things that go into, like, the obvious supply and demand.
I want to just ask you why, like, I don't really even understand the point that you're making, saying that the workers produce more than what it's worth or what they're paid. I'm kind of confused by that, because can a worker without a factory or if these workers that you're referring to here are producing more than what they're worth, why do they need this capitalist in the first place? Why do they need a factory? Why do they need whatever company they're working at? Why don't they just sit at home and produce it? Because they can produce it.
Well, okay, yeah, so that's a good point. And sometimes workers do that. Workers create cooperatives, and workers create democratic workplaces where property is shared. But the state protections of capitalism makes that incredibly difficult. So you have an individual who owns that deed, that piece of paper that the state ratifies, only has to pay the individual a certain amount, and can easily outcompete a cooperative that gives their employees or their owners their wage. So a lot of the capitalist argument is that, well, the capitalist system increases innovation. And I would say it does to some extent, but if that advantage of adhering so much wealth, because in a capitalist society, the capitalists can hoard that wealth, or I guess I shouldn't say hoard, but can bring it in from the workers, what they produce. They have a greater incentive and a greater amount of wealth singularly within the marketplace. if that was eliminated, I think cooperatives would be just as competitive and just as innovative. As far as like taking what the worker produces, let me just give you an example. Let's say I'm a capitalist. I have 200 logs, and I don't know how I acquired them. I inherited them. Let's say I have 200 logs, and I have 3 employees that chop them up and turn them into chairs. So the chairs cost. I make $400 off the chairs. I have to pay $200 in labor. I pocket the other 200. That 200 was directly produced by these workers. So me taking it away is me saying the state says I own this property, and I am therefore under their power, allowed to take away what you produce. So I'm not saying the capitalist has nothing there. The capitalists did give them the opportunity, and they did provide overhead or safety measures, or employee benefits or whatever. But if he skims anything off the top, he is taking away from what the workers produce.
So I don't mean to interrupt, but so my question is, what incentive is there for the capitalist, as you say, to do anything if there's no profit to be earned for him, if it's going to be completely distributed to the workers?
Well, in that case, I would go back to what I said, that in like a culture, I hate the word society, but for lack of a better term, in a society where individuals organize horizontally, the innovation and the incentive is really decentralized among the workers, but they can form worker unions, they can form worker cooperatives to gain wealth themselves, to flood a marketplace. And if the capitalist advantage wasn't there, where the singular individual has the incentive to accrue vast amounts of wealth, I think we would see just as much innovation from the worker level, because that would be what we see as our ability to gain wealth. So the capitalist system, what it does is it incentivizes individuals to take labor away from workers in the form of profit. But if we don't have that there, people are going to be just as innovative to make a living.
So I think I just fundamentally disagree with that as the result. Because and I know it's really easy to do the classic, like, communism hasn't worked anywhere.
Right.
Because that hasn't been tried correctly. And I think you could say the same thing with capitalism, right? Like what we talked about that earlier. What we have here in America is still kind of a bastardized government collusion with big corporations version of capitalism. But ultimately, I mean, what drives innovation? And I think a big part of what drives innovation is investment and risk. So if I am, let's not demonize me in this scenario. So let's say I'm a reasonably middle-class person, and I want to I want to invent a business or start a business that creates a better widget, whatever the widget is. And I have this idea of how to do it. But for me to get started with that business, it's going to take an investment of $100,000. So I invest that $100,000, mostly my life savings, go out and get workers, create an assembly line. So in that scenario, why would I not be entitled to profit?
I think in that scenario, you would. And I think that in profit, in the sense that you're referring to, I think you would be entitled to that in a society where we have a horizontal or democratically organized workforce. And I think that would go straight back to just contractual agreements, understanding that you took the risk, and once this risk is paid off, plus an agreed amount of whatever interest, that you can make a sizable amount of money because of the risk you put on and because of the benefit that you provided me.
And does the state cap me then and determine like what I'm allowed to make?
The state is where it gets tricky. But I guess I'm talking more of a libertarian socialist model right now, where the state is minimal or doesn't exist. So on this level, the amount that you earn, your return on your $100,000, is strictly negotiated between you and your workers. So you invest this, we have a group meeting, we'll say, well, I'm willing for you to take this much out of my check for, giving me this job. So you get, like, let's say a 30% return on your $100,000. If it gets done within a year, if it takes 2 years, you get a bigger return, or if it takes 10 years, you get an even bigger return. And I think those contractual agreements can be, hashed out in a really civil, democratic manner. And if it can't be done that way, we have a population of 7 billion on this planet, and I can assure you that there will be workers somewhere willing to work. Now, there's economic factors that result in maybe workers not being available in certain areas, but that's no different than capitalism, really. So
I guess I'm a little confused by the distinction you're making. Well, one is whether is it in some way just simply a matter of size, or is it what you're seeing as the justness, or however you might view that, of the relationship between the capitalist and the worker? Because in John's scenario, I mean, he's still the capitalist, maybe not a capitalist in the same way you were originally describing. I guess, and when you talk about having this all sort of taking place in your view in sort of a stateless or very minimally state society, I guess my question would be like, how do you enforce things working out just the way you want without some state or some body to make sure these are the sort of contracts that happen, as opposed to more standard wage labor like you often see? I mean, these models, I'm in favor of all sorts of models. I'm in favor of the freedom for any model people want to choose, but it sounds like you think it should be in a certain type of contract, a certain type of arrangement. And if you're looking at this all in a world with a very minimal or non-existent state even, I'm curious how you think that comes about, where these are the only sort of type of worker and owner or whatever, what have you, relationships that there are.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair question. So let's just say we're talking about left anarchism, let's say, where there's no state. In that scenario, general anarchist thought in the schools of the left generally look at local assemblies, so communitarian assemblies, where it's completely horizontal and democratically organized. So let's say that John, you were the one that invested $100,000, and we agreed, hey, you can pay us this, but take this much out, so you get a 30% return on $100,000 within a year, which is a pretty good return within just 12 months. But let's say you don't do that, and you just refuse to do it. What would happen is the community would, either that you operate within, so the workers that participate in it and the community that uses your business would decide whether or not that's legitimate, and if it isn't, they could, by majority rule, declare your arrangement illegitimate. So it would function almost as if like a trial, but on a very localized scale. And
what do you think happens in that scenario if it's ruled illegitimate?
If it's ruled illegitimate in that scenario, I would assume the community would, not participate in that business model. That individual has no right to the property, and it should be returned to, whatever status it was before.
Okay.
Dan, your thoughts? This is the quietest Dan's ever been on a show.
Hey man, I'm the host. I don't have opinions. Mark, whatever you say, I believe you. It's fine.
I like it. Not biased at all.
Hey, Dan Smots here. I'm taking a second to interrupt myself talking to talk about myself because, I don't get paid a penny for the hours and hours that I put into creating this show for you guys in your greedy little ears, and I've got a family to feed. To make that happen, I run my own media business called Goulash Media. If you have a need in anything from video production to graphic design to audio production and beyond, you can get it all for a painfully fair price at Goulash Media. In video, I do weddings, music videos, commercials, pageants, plays, etc., etc., etc. For design, I do photo editing, album art, logos, branding, business cards, merchandise, you name it. For audio, I do engineering, production, editing, jingles, and, well, podcasts. So if you've got a media need of any kind, or if you'd just like to give a little something back and help keep my children fed, check out all the endless options at my website, goulashmedia.net. That's goulash, Goulash, media.net, where we cater to the little guy with the big vision. Okay.
No, look, Bobby, I think that was a pretty good description of it. I just think what it comes down to, and what I think is a fundamental disagreement between Marxists and, at least on economics, Marxists and capitalists, is what drives human behavior. And
Right.
I have a hard time imagining in a horizontal society like you described, why anyone would take personal risk to innovate. That would just not happen, I don't think.
I agree. If all you're doing is gaining back what you got, then you're just another employee. I don't see the appeal and how that would work, but that's just me.
Well, if let's say you took Nike's CEO, or even top 10 most wealthy individuals, and spread it across all their employees, all these employees would make a sizable income. They'd make more than doctors and lawyers in the U.S. do right now. So I mean, I would say that's the innovation right there. Is you would have a vast amount of individuals who could accrue wealth. Now, individuals, just through sheer market forces, would have a real difficult time making a couple $1 billion. That would be difficult. But really, the sense of innovation is in that sense just decentralized and split amongst the workers who still want to make $1 million a year. And with a company like Apple or Nike, which under the regime we have, they have all sorts of corporate privilege and yada yada yada. But there are incredibly profitable businesses out there where, if split among the workers would be rather well off. And I actually think that would be a healthier model than a small group of people go incredibly.
I mean, this is the another fundamental question. But does the low-skilled worker at the end of the assembly line doing a repeated task over and over, is the value of that person the same as the CFO who figures out how to leverage debt and get the company through a difficult quarter?
Well, that's another good question, and there's two different, I guess, schools within the anarchist left on that, and that is the more communist side of the anarchist left, where they say that worker's actually more valuable because they're physically on the line. And the CFO, they wouldn't even exist. Those positions would just be democratically decided, which, I mean, I think you and I can agree that wouldn't be very efficient. And then there's
jobs would be gone. I mean, yeah.
Right. So, but there's also factions of it that say these positions can exist, and they can be democratically elected, kind of like a Republican system, where you would elect temporary or term limited managers or CFOs, or call it something else, and have that decision, whatever you call it, and then actually mathematically calculate how much that individual produces and distribute it in that sense. So let's say a manager who supervises, it's calculated their net worth to be $60,000 a year, and the worker, we see that without that worker position there, the company is actually out $100,000 a year. In that scenario, then sure, the individual who is working the assembly line would definitely make more. I think it can be calculated in the marketplace, and I think current business models do far more intensive data analysis and financial analysis than that.
Do you think, and sorry, Dan, I don't know if you want to stay on
You're
this.
fine. Keep it going.
So do you think, here's the thing, you're talking about the contract being almost between the worker and the business, as if the worker is an investor. But isn't the functionality of a worker that they can be replaced? I mean, if a business is hiring on a worker at, and we can chart this out, but at a given wage, because that's what the market dictates is the wage, there's several people willing to line up and earn that wage. So I guess it's just I don't know. I guess maybe maybe I need to read more into Marxist thought. For me, it's just so hard to comprehend it, because it seems very philosophical, but not how human behavior functions.
Right. So I think I think you might be misunderstanding my idea of the worker as also the owner. So what you're saying is completely right in many market systems, whether leaning left or whether leaning right. In a market system, a worker is expendable. However, how socialism at least on the libertarian side, the authoritarian side is a whole other mess anyway, but on the libertarian side, essentially what it looks at the worker as the owner. So the worker owns the business, and the worker owns a portion of it. Let's say there's 500 employees. one employee owns 1/500th of that. And they're contracted with the rest of the workers. Now, if an individual has invested in the business and given these people that opportunity, the contract just becomes that much more dynamic at that point. And these can be, worked out in a democratic setting, in a committee setting.
But
Do
they're
you
not
think
worth
that? Sorry.
Sorry, no, I mean, but that's my issue is like, so let's say Amazon has, I don't know, they probably have 10,000 employees, maybe more.
Right.
So I'm going to go work for Amazon. Amazon's really close to $1 trillion company.
Sure.
So let's say I beat out 4 other guys for a assembly line job.
Okay.
And then automatically I should get a salary of 100 million.
No, that's not really what I'm saying. If Amazon somehow manifested itself either in a free market capitalist system, which I assume you guys propose, correct me if I'm wrong, or if it emerged in my libertarian socialist universe, that would be very bizarre because Amazon has been afforded many different state protections, whether it's from tax cuts to corporate privilege to loosening on tariffs, exceptions to tariffs, things like that. Due to that, it's been able to expand and grow to what it is. So even in I know I brought up the Ron Paul Libertarian Society before, but I think the shoe fits here. Even in something like that, where there's even less state protections, the free market would compete out Amazon. There's no way you'd have a mega conglomerate like that without some sort of power structure reinforcing it. Am I wrong?
I don't know. I mean,
I don't know. That's my answer too. I don't know that you're right or wrong.
Okay.
I'd like to find out.
I mean, I agree
want
with
those
you that
protections.
the state colludes with Amazon currently.
Right.
And I think that the state creates barriers to entry within capitalism
Sure.
to competitors to Amazon, which I think is really problematic.
Right. So do you think Amazon could come about, or a company that size could come about without these privileges?
I think that they could, yes. I don't know that they would do it in the same way. That obviously wouldn't be the same way because we have these certain privileges in place. I think a company could grow in a similar, interesting way through a lot of the things Amazon does if they were leveraging a lot of the market share they were gaining. In a lot of ways Amazon did. It's not like every dollar Amazon has made are through state protections. There are simply state protections that have enabled it to grow faster and larger and bigger. Sure. I think that's certainly true. And the fact that I'm not sure where we're going to go with the next point, but
sure. I mean, there are examples of companies that haven't had the same level of protections Amazon has and have still grown. Like I would say Facebook, for example. It's hard for me to think off the top of my head of state protections. Maybe some of their campuses in California have like no property tax or something like that. But Amazon is, I mean, when we mention Amazon's one of the worst offenders because they pretty much play this game when they're trying to create a new factory where they're like, hey guys, we'll come to your city and create all this economic activity only if you give us 0% taxes.
John, I might look even deeper than that because even though they might not have had the same kind of transparent state protections that you might see in Amazon, you could argue in many ways that any large company, due to the current system, but by its very nature, is going to be a beneficiary of state protections along the way. Even something as simple as being listed on the stock market or having VCs fund you, that's based on state protections that don't allow smaller investors to invest in companies in similar ways that certain other people can. And I think some of that has changed in the last couple of years, but there are state protections that we don't even think of simply due to the ways that these companies are allowed to get money in the first place and grow to the size that they did in the first place. That's not even going into conspiracy theories about the CIA funding Facebook or any of that stuff. I won't go there.
Right. And
Dan, are you going to?
This definitely isn't the show to bring up conspiracy theories, Mark, so.
I would never want to do that.
I really agree with a lot of what you're saying. I do think I would be hard pressed to look back at history and find a market society, what you guys I would assume, and what I would call a free market society that allows a monopoly to take hold. There's almost always some sort of state privilege there. The first monopoly really that I can think of was the East India Company. which was
That's
set
a
up.
classic example, yeah.
Yeah, which was set up by the Queen to effectively pillage India. We don't have to get into the debate there, but I think
you said it right there. It's not a free market monopoly, so it's not really applicable to the kind of thing, at least the kind of thing I would advocate for. Set up by the Queen.
Right. Which is
done there already.
Which is state interference, and it was the first LLC. It was state interference and state privilege at that point. So it made it so competitors would have a hard time, getting their way in the market. So that's one thing I do like about one of the ideas of free market capitalism is that it outcompetes monopolies, and I think monopolies are bad as a whole because they don't give consumers a choice. I do think diversification of the marketplace is incredibly important. Within a market socialist economy or within a market capitalist economy, I do think it's incredibly important to have a diversified workplace, or a diversified marketplace, I should say. And credit to Adam Smith for kind of pointing out that a free marketplace would kind of decentivize, and not really decentivize, but delegitimize monopolies as a whole.
I think at the end of the day, you're right though about that. I do think more truer to a free market, or the kind of free market I would envision. I don't even love that term entirely either, but monopolies are nearly impossible, because at the end of the day, there's always going to be a smaller people and smaller companies to undermine something that does grow big, unless it's allowed to maintain that size that is largely often due to state protections. So I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you on that.
And there's a lot of things you could call state protections that within capitalism right now that I think are frustrating, right? So the perfect example is, let's say, we all decide after this call, like, we're going to create a new Facebook, and we, take something that they kind of have, and we repurpose it and we make it our own. Let's say the newsfeed. So we take and repurpose it, and then Facebook's lawyers come and say, hey, we're going to sue you. So Facebook is in this situation where they can afford millions of dollars in legal fees, and we, being the new small business owners, cannot, right? It'll ruin our business. And so I think that's partly where these corporations are able to leverage and shut people out from competition. But I think I think monopolies are a difficult discussion in a truly free capitalist system where there are no benefits, where there are no state benefits to the corporations, because then it's is it state control to come in and break up these monopolies just because they're big? But when you have this collusion that is so clear that already exists, then, we have to get rid of the collusion between government and corporations before we can even address if big corporations are a bad thing.
But don't you think collusion between business and state, don't you think that's integral to the property rights agreement that is really the foundation of capitalism? A state needs to protect the capitalists, their property. That's part of really the U.S. Constitution. Was under the Articles of Confederation, banks were getting seized by just public opinion because banks couldn't operate. It was kind of a shitty time. And there was one incident called Shays Rebellion where there were a bunch of farmers that literally threatened the existence of a bank. And it really was thought that too much democracy at a local level was a bad thing and it would threaten property rights, which is why the Constitution afforded, a much more powerful office that could reinforce the property rights. And most what we would call capitalist countries, I know you guys are saying it's not perfectly capitalist, and I would happen to agree, but most of those countries are really modeled after the U.S. Constitution in that way, and really kind of set the stage for the era of capitalism we see now. So I'm not sure it can happen where, financial power and government power can truly ever be separate for that reason.
I mean, maybe not in a democracy. I think, that's an interesting question.
Mark, weigh in, and then let's move on to something else.
Something else? I guess one distinction, or one thing I might want to ask you further about is, again, I kind of said this before, but is it a matter of scale in some way to you? Is it a matter of size? I mean, when you say the capitalist, it sounds like you're often referring to sort of like the large business owner or the factory owner. Are you referring to yourself? Are you referring to the shirt on your back? Are you referring to if you take $50 and just want to start a very, very small lawn mowing business? I don't know. I'm just making things up here. Or a dog walking business. I mean, would you apply the same, I guess, idea and philosophy to something that's small? And if not, at what point does your philosophy about how a business and how people should interact with each other change? Is it simply because we're still talking about, I mean, the state is protecting my leash, my ownership of my leash for my dog walking business as much as it is the factory, maybe more so the factory due to other state protections that we discussed. But generally, I mean, philosophically speaking, when does it change for you? When it changes from you to that large factory owner? Is there a certain point in between there you could point to?
Yeah, well, what it is, it's a fundamental distinction of property rights. So the short answer is that it applies everywhere, no matter how big, no matter how small. It applies everywhere because it's a fundamental distinction between, property rights tied to production and use, and property rights tied to a public state certification of ownership. So yeah, again, the short answer is yes, it applies everywhere. There is no line. There is no, you only pull in, $1,000 off your dog walking business this year. You can afford to, pay an employee $2 an hour to walk a dog once in a while. Fundamentally speaking, when the property rights shift to that of production being the source of property rather than investment or state protection being the source of property, it applies everywhere. Does that answer your question? I tried best of both worlds, complicated and not there. So,
it answers it. I just can't say I fully understand it philosophically speaking. I guess like, are you saying that it would apply, meaning that, let's say you take $100 and you buy a couple dog leashes and some backpacks and some dog bags, and you just decide you're going to walk dogs, but you also want other people to walk some dogs. And maybe even in the beginning, you're going to take less money than them because you want to build the business up and you're willing to take less. You're willing to just walk dogs for free while you're paying people $5 an hour, $10 an hour, whatever it may be. Over time, that business grows and grows and grows. You've been taking no money this whole time, but finally you reach a point where you are able to expand a little bit more. You are able to afford more marketing. You're able to afford more flyers, and suddenly you are making a profit. Do you think do you think the most you should ever make is that same $2, $5, $10 that you pay any dog walker? Should they suddenly be a part of that collective, even though you did all of the work to start this business, even though you did all the work, even though you made all of that sacrifice, even though you put out all these flyers, did all this other back end work to make things where it is now? Are you suddenly all on that same scale where you should just be sort of dividing that money? And if I'm oversimplifying things, I know I probably am in many ways, but you see where I'm kind of going with it.
No, I don't think you're oversimplifying. I think it goes back to John's question earlier about investing $100,000. It's the same thing. So if 3 individuals want to start this and 3 individuals want to take the risk, that can still happen. But we know that would be kind of difficult to do. So if one individual wants to do it, if one individual wants to invest, he can, like I said, get into a contractual agreement with other people that he will get his money back. And
but what if he doesn't want to have a contractual agreement? What if he just says, I just want to pay you $5 an hour to walk dogs or for every dog walk, and they agree? In your view, should that agreement be banned or stopped by the community?
Well, I'm more of I like to consider myself an advocate for voluntary interaction and not no force be involved. So I can't say that I would personally agree with a community coming in and saying, hey, you can't do that. But
slavery.
According to rhetoric and some factions of the left, whether it be state or not, they would consider that theft from the worker, and they would say you cannot operate like that.
Would you say that?
I don't think it would be theft as it's voluntary. Personally, I understand the necessity of the capitalist organization of labor, and I understand it, and I think it's given the world a lot of benefits and a lot of not so good negatives. But I think more that I'm what I call myself a contemporary Marxist, where I understand the phase of capitalism is really setting the stage for a future socialist society. So personally, no, I don't believe that's theft, as it is voluntary. Now, consent can be coercive, as I'm sure you guys are all aware. But if it's just a purely voluntary, there's no coercive actions in place, then yeah, I would not say it's theft.
It depends on how you define coercive. And I'm not saying you're saying this, but I've heard people make the argument that would say, that, for example, if this dog walker, he's hungry, maybe it's a homeless guy, he has no alternatives. The fact that he needs that $5 to walk that dog, that is coercion in a way because of his predicament. That person is coercing them. And I'm certainly not saying you're making that, but I have heard people make that sort of argument where if someone is in a situation where they need the job, it's coercion to sort of hold that wage over their head in a way. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I don't agree with that talking point that you brought up. Because I mean, we all need, like, if there were no real economic system that was verifiable, if we were all just cavemen, hanging out, you need to work to live. And I mean, there's no getting around that. When people say work or die is more of a threat than it is a choice, I would gravely disagree. That everybody needs to work in order to survive. That's just a product of our condition. I'm of the opinion that we're animals completely, and every animal out there needs to work to survive. So I don't agree with that talking point, and I really wish people would stop using it. But I do think there's a difference between. Okay. Yeah, I do think there's a difference between people voluntarily deciding to work and being under conditions in which they are underrepresented and unable to actualize the value of their labor, and people just voluntarily choosing to do jobs they want to do for something they're happy for. There is a difference between that, and I think that's the biggest distinction between really the first and the third world is work for sustenance, work to literally just survive, and in the first world where you have a little more choice in the matter and you're a little more able to have options to make actual living, to have freelance time or what have you. Dan, I'm sorry. I know you wanted to move on.
No, it's fine. We'll just stick to this as long as everybody's got something to say. I mean, 90% of the episodes that I record are me learning. So I'm just sitting here soaking it up as you guys go back and forth. I enjoy it. Mark, do you have any response to that?
Yeah, I just actually have one more question on this sort of take. I guess so a lot of the ways, you're saying you wouldn't consider the situation we described theft, so you're not on that necessarily, that the rent is theft bandwagon, and you said you were opposed to sort of
rent is a little bit different, but
okay, let's not even go down that route, because that's a whole nother that would be another hour, or maybe we can go down it. I don't know, it's Dan's show, but that's not where I meant to go with it. I was just kind of tossing that phrase out there.
It's all right.
I know that is different than what you're saying. Because I have heard that argument in a more constructive way too. So, okay. So I guess, how am I trying to phrase this? So, okay. So if you're a lot of the way, like what I was trying to say is you're in favor of this sort of voluntary relationships and, sort of this sort of cooperative agreements and contracts between workers and owners, or again, whatever you would call it. So I guess what I'm saying is, is this vision that you have of society, of how things should be, is it just where you hope things go? Is it where you think that things can go as we progress as humans, as we learn about each other more, as we delve into each other's philosophy more, where you hope society will decide to go? Or do you think that there should be any kind of physical, state-esque, or even local community-esque physical enforcement of this at any point?
Well, what I was really describing is, Dan kind of asked, describe Marxism, describe your viewpoint on it and things like that. And I was really speaking to fundamentals. I don't really like the idea of a community democratically operating as effectively a state and just not calling it as such, which is what a lot of left anarchists like to do, and I don't like that. So that's not really my vision for the future. And I don't think if it happened tomorrow, it would really work all that well. I think a more free market oriented era, community co-ops would be a little bit better. But what I foresee, I guess, is automation really taking over in capitalism to the point where, people around the world are starving and are unable to fulfill any type of work whatsoever and gain any level of sustenance. And I think it'll take a while.
That's transhumanism, next evolution of man. It's fine.
Exactly. And that would be totally fucking cool. I would definitely thumbs up that.
I can't wait to have a robot eye.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I want like a robot body where you can just plug shit into me and I feel funny. That sounds amazing. And I mean, I think at that point we'd be so beyond like production that like things like 3D printing and decentralized manufacturing and individual manufacturing, literally just a footprint in our homes. And at that point, it's really just going to be a scramble for basic, basic raw materials, which we can chemically engineer very easily. If we have a hunk of dirt that has all the protons, electrons, and everything in it that we need to really create other elements and therefore other raw minerals. So if if we get to the point where we have like nuclear fusion, or if we harness more power from the sun, I mean, we can produce whatever the hell we want. And I really think once automation takes over, it will force us into that kind of semi-socialist idea that all the factors of production are really universally owned. And that will propel us into, what I like to call the luxury gay space communism complex, which is really home base. So
Wait, what'd you call it again?
that's luxury gay space communism. It's like Star Trek, but like with gay strippers everywhere. It's pretty cool. Like, I mean, nobody's written a book on it yet, but maybe I'll start.
You should write it. You should write it.
Yeah. All right. I should.
Only gay strippers. Why can't everybody strip here? I don't
Yeah,
know.
we're missing our token gay guy, Ryan. So
Of all times, it's when the gay strippers are taking over in the science fiction.
that's right. All right. Well, I mean, we've gone for enough for this to be an episode of its own. We can wrap it up there, unless you guys have any further thoughts. I know that we typically do these for like hours and hours and ridiculous amounts of time until everybody's ready to shoot themselves or shoot Ryan because he keeps bringing up new topics. But
North
you guys,
Korea.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I had another topic that I had planned to talk about tonight.
One more
It was
hour.
Kavanaugh and Me Too, and hey, I'm down to keep talking if you guys want to. But
We can do a short Kavanaugh thing.
I could
right?
hang for a little bit. We can make it a bonus, or just keep this your own show. I mean,
well, yeah, let's. Yeah, that'd be great, Mark, for
thanks.
the first time
I'm
ever.
letting you know what you're allowed to do in post production.
If you want to keep hosting this show, you feel free to do so.
why
Free
I'm
market. But yeah, we'll wrap it there, and we'll just see what happens after. But do you, John, Mark, Bobby, do you guys have any final thoughts on this topic before we wrap it up?
No, I'll weigh in real quick. I thought it was a really interesting discussion, Bobby. I have a friend of mine who is a out and out communist, and I talk to him a lot about economics. And look, I mean, I think fundamentally what we disagree on is motivation, like what propels human beings and what like will happen in a society where the incentives are switched up. And I guess like I'm still, my mind has not been changed. Maybe I'm just hardwired that way. I don't know. But my biggest issue with economic Marxism, and I think cultural Marxism is a totally different thing. And really it's where I focus a lot of my attention and animosity. But on economic Marxism, I think the biggest issue is that I would not, like, let's say I was I'll say a doctor, and if I made the same amount as the receptionist, I don't believe I would be incentivized to work the extra hours, take on the extra patients, do the extra research that would be necessary to propel the clinic or what have you. And that's one example, but I just ultimately, I think I place a lot more value on leadership and R&D and the brains behind. I don't mean that to say that somebody who's on the assembly line doesn't have brains, but the intellectual backing to a company. I think that's
the person
valued
who makes
high.
the whole job even a thing.
Right.
Like,
Well, look,
without them,
there's two,
the people on the assembly line
there's
don't
two
exist.
factors that really like drive a company. There's the capital that's being invested to believe in these ideas, and then there's the ideas. And if you don't have either of those things, there's no assembly line. And so I fundamentally disagree with the idea that the person on the assembly line, I think there's something to be said with maybe we should argue about what that wage is. Like maybe there's, but the idea that they're equal.
Okay, Ryan, bring up a new topic.
No, I
your
won't.
final
Right,
closing
now we gotta
statement.
talk about minimum wage for 45
I won't get into that,
Thanks.
but the idea that they're equal to the person who has the specialized knowledge in the field, or the person who has invested their own personal capital, who's working twice as much time. I don't see them as equal in terms of what they're worth, as far as a wage goes.
I would say if I characterize that a receptionist should make the same amount as a medical doctor, I did not mean to say that.
I was coming up with an example that sounded a lot better, but I think we talked about the CFO, right? So let's do that. So the person on the assembly line and the CFO, and I would argue that the CFO is a inherently more valuable job and should be paid a higher wage. And the reason I believe that is because the assembly line person could be replaced by anyone in society, but the CFO and the skills and the knowledge and the abilities they have could not be replaced by anyone in society.
Well, I would again say, yeah, it makes sense, but I would again say if I did, I didn't mean to, but I didn't attempt to characterize a CFO and an assembly line worker making the same. What I do distinctly remember saying was that among a company, it can be decided mathematically the net contribution and the net value that different positions can give the company. And I do distinctly remember saying that businesses and financial agencies now do far more complex financial analyses than that. And it's definitely within the realm of possibility. And within that, I do think you'd see definitely that a doctor adds far more value to a business than a receptionist. And a CFO, makes financial decisions that, sustain the well-being of a company far more than that of an assembly line worker. So if I characterized it that they should all make the same money, I would like to clarify that I did not mean that. There's obviously going to be diversified wages based on the idea that workers produce the value of the company, which is really where I was coming from there. But there would be different wages throughout. I think the idea that everybody gets paid the same no matter what is a more liberal than communist argument, and it doesn't really ideologically stand up to anything. So I think we'd agree that wouldn't work out too well.
Okay.
I'm confused, but that's pretty normal for me. This is supposed to be closing statements, but it's whatever.
Closing debates.
Mark, do you got any closing arguments you want to bring up?
On the same subject, or should I make up a random topic?
Who knows, man? The show's just whatever it is. Yeah.
Now I'll just say, thanks for Bobby for stepping into the fire on the. Not that it was that much fire. I think we're all reasonable people, even Bobby.
Dude, this whole episode's been fire. What are you talking about?
Fire, baby, yeah. I think in many ways it sounds like Bobby is more of like a lot of people I've talked to before that are. I don't know if you would call yourself that, but it sounds like you lean more towards the ideas of like a libertarian socialist kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And I'm not labeling you that per se, but I mean, yeah. And then,
he is, so no more arguments there.
Okay, good. Yeah. And to me, I have mixed views on a lot of my thoughts about libertarian socialists, but like I disagree with philosophically a lot of the concepts about how things will work out and how things should work out. But I do connect with most of them on this idea that we should not be using violence and force, and that we should minimize, unjustness in any way. We might have slightly different views about what that is, but I think there is a lot of common ground there that, really, that all of us have in many ways. So it's always good. If you took all of our labels and tossed them in a bucket, people would think that it would just be hell and fury. So I'm glad that we can continue to do these shows, even when we, have a new person stepping in, and still not be completely, at each other's throats.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope that we can, Mark, when the next time you're cooking a meal, when we planned for the episode to come on, maybe we'll find a different libertarian to step in. Bobby, out of curiosity, as the more left-leaning person in the group, or clearly the most left-leaning person in the group, but have you ever called somebody Nazi or punched somebody in the face for wearing a MAGA hat?
Have I called somebody a Nazi? Yeah.
Were they a Nazi?
Yeah, they were. So, and I've also ironically used the term, but I don't think everybody, even on the alt-right, is not like I really hate.
He doesn't even think John's a Nazi.
Like people that like equate one thing they don't like with the worst thing they can think of. That's the behavior of a 9-year-old. And like I'm sorry if you guys have 9-year-olds at home, but they're not.
I do have a 9-year-old at home, but she's never called anybody a Nazi either.
What a Nazi! Your little Nazi, Dan's Nazi 9-year-old.
That's right.
No, I've never punched somebody for being a Nazi or called anybody a Nazi just because I didn't like them.
Then you might be unqualified for the Democrat position.
Yeah, I think it would be.
We can't find a real Democrat anywhere.
Right.
We even pulled a Marxist off the street, and he doesn't even fall under the category of Democrat.
Can't we just get a completely unreasonable person on?
It shouldn't be this hard. Like they're all over.
It's
TV.
impossible.
Right. Yeah, clearly they're the majority. But Bobby, any final thoughts for you on this topic that we've ended up in this episode?
That we accidentally did.
Yeah, I've kind of orchestrated kind of basics and then kind of my view on things. I do want to just clarify that I guess what I like and what I foresee are somewhat different things, but I do think we're approaching the point where automation is taking over, and capitalism set the stage for that. And I would argue that automation is really what sets the stage for like a new level of socialism that the left hasn't even really begun to ponder all that much. So
yeah, this episode is definitely going to have to come out on Monday because Zoltan Istvan's interview came out yesterday. So, I mean, this will tie in perfectly to that.
It's so funny, Bobby, because I was just reading a book by John Tamney, who is like a hardcore libertarian. He runs like realclearmarkets.com.
Okay.
And his argument in the book was automation is going to lead to an ideal capitalism. So basically where everyone gets to work the job they actually want. So I think that's so interesting that I mean, automation's going to happen. I think everyone agrees.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and John, I think that's kind of the same point that Zoltan was making. I mean, he's he's libertarian, and he's like, once all these crappy jobs go away, we'll be able to do the jobs that we want to do and make a freer market, freer capitalism. So you can take it either way.
Yeah, no, I mean, he pointed to things like what you're doing here.
I kind of hold the same view too. So you can get there in a lot of different, philosophical thought processes. But
yeah, for sure.
I generally think that is the way. I think things are better when there's automation. Ultimately, I think it always will be.
Well, I don't trust any of it. I think it's going to be the overthrow of humanity. But that's
we'll be slaves. I'm just saying we'll have some fun, and there'll be gay strippers in space or whatever.
Oh, that'll be great.
Yep. Title of the episode: Gay Strippers in Space. All right.
There's actually how do you guys I don't know the atmosphere. Like I can feel the atmosphere of the show and probably the audience, but I won't say the word just for sake of it, but there's
is it the N-word
on YouTube called Gay N-word from Outer Space.
Oh, it is the N-word. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right.
And
I'm going to just disavow the rest of the show as I've had to do in the past.
I disavow starting now.
I disavow again.
John's disavowed every single TriPartisan Triggering episode he's been on so far. So
you guys should look up that movie. It's on YouTube. It's only a half hour. It's freaking weird, but check it out.
Did you have a question about it, or just whether or not we've heard of this?
It was a plug.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if you've seen it, and if not, was going to recommend to see it. So
I'll check it out, maybe, I guess.
It will be on your search history forever. So
right, yeah. I mean, the CIA's got their eye on me for worse reasons, so it probably couldn't hurt. All right, well, guys, thanks so much for being here. Bobby, thanks for filling in, and happily have you back on again in the future, man. John, Mark, Bobby, it's been fun. It's been real. You guys have a great evening, and we'll speak to you in the future.
Adios.
Thanks out.
Not unless the future consists of gay robots in space.
Then definitely.
Hey, guys, thanks for sticking around to the end. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And I made the beginning short sweet. I feel like somebody will still complain, probably the same people, but I feel like that gives me leeway to make this outro as painfully long as I possibly can. So, thanks for listening. It was fun. It's a good time. If you disagree with anything, go join the forum. Check that out. The forum can be found at tsidpod.com/forum. And you can chime in, join these conversations. We get into some debates on there. That's where we found Bobby, who filled in. So being on the forum and chiming in on the forum might mean that you could potentially be on the show someday. So go check out the forum. Go let us know what you think. Let me know what you think about these intros and outros. Should they be longer? Should they be shorter? Were they fine the way they were? Should they be gone completely? Who knows? Let me know at tsidpod.com/forum. Also, be sure to tune into the Anti-News live broadcast tonight. We're going to be covering everything that's going on in the world. Of course, we're going to touch on all the major things like the Kavanaugh case and the other things that people are talking about. That might be it. That's all I have heard about in the last week, and it is freaking bizarre. And we're going to break it down to the best of our abilities tonight on Anti-News Live. Craig and I will be doing that. You can call in, you can write in, you can call and leave a voicemail, you can chat with us in the chat bar and all that fun stuff. So check it out at antinewslive.com tonight at 9 o'clock Central Standard Time. What else do we got on the agenda? Go like us, share us, subscribe us, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the like. Be sure to hit the thumbs ups. Be sure to hit the notification bell on YouTube. Be sure to do all that stuff. Check it all out. Go out and talk to somebody this week about something uncomfortable. Just challenge yourself to be open and honest with people. You don't have to be a dick. You can just be, honest and not pretend to know everything about everything. Like in this episode, I think that that's pretty important. I try to, when we're talking about Marxism with three guys who are really, really, really nerded down into politics, probably way more than I am, there were a lot of times where I'm just like, I think it's interesting. I enjoyed the conversation a lot. But there were some times where I'm just like, wait, what are we talking about? I get distracted very easily. So in long conversations like that, it's sometimes hard to just shut up and listen. That's what I tried to do. And I would encourage you to go out and do the same with people in your day-to-day life. Talk about something real and be willing to say, I don't know the answer to something, or I don't know the meaning of this, because you don't. We don't. We're all humans. We're all figuring this shit out together. It feels good to be able to say shit and not have it bleeped out. Thanks, past self. Anyway, so that's all. That's all for today. Check out all the stuff. TSIDpod.com. That's where you can find links to everything. All the show notes. All the fun stuff. All the great stuff. Check out Mark's show. Lions of Liberty podcast, giving him a free plug, free shout out. I feel like I should drag this on even longer just because, again, another plug for the 29 Toes podcast. Check him out. 29 Toes podcast. Is this too long for you yet? So what did I do this weekend? I went to Goodwill after church today, which is Sunday when I'm recording this. And something occurred to me. Around Halloween time, Goodwill is able to take all the clothes, all the ridiculously stupid-looking clothes that were donated as clothes, and they are able to, after they've sat on the shelf for long enough because they're so stupid, they can put them on the Halloween rack as a costume and charge a higher value, and people will buy them. It's freaking brilliant. Find a way to take that business model and work it into your day-to-day life. I don't have any real way that applies, but figure it out and get back to me. All right, I think that we've dragged this out long enough. I totally forgot to mention the Downers Club. Go join the Downers Club. That's what keeps the show going. That's what keeps the show getting bigger and better with new shows, even like the Anti-News and live broadcasts and new graphics, better imaging, better audio, better everything. I'm constantly working on ways to improve the show for you guys, so please sign up, consider supporting The System Is Down by going to patreon.com/The System Is Down and signing up for the Downers Club for as little as a cup of coffee a month. You'll barely even notice that $5 is missing per month, but you will definitely notice the plethora of bonus audio content that you have access to every single week. Check it out, patreon.com/The System Is Down. And that concludes today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys tune in next week. If you do so, of course, you know that I will be happily, uncomfortably here nestled into your ear canal like that cat that crawled underneath the porch and in the dead of winter and crawled under some old leaves until he died of cold, and then he rotted away, and come springtime the scent was just so overwhelming that we had to move. That's what I'll be like next Monday morning. I'll be nestled into your ear canal uncomfortably like that poor cat. So uncomfortable that you might have to move. Until then, question everything and stay uncomfortable. Thanks. This has been a Goulash Media production. goulashmedia.net.
This concludes our broadcast day. Click.